Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this industry capability mapping workshop on offshore wind. My name's David Hunt. I'm part of the team at Concept Consulting Group who are undertaking this study, which I'll talk a bit about in a moment. So apologies if there's a little bit of background noise. We've got
apologies. I think we've got an issue with our camera. It's the camera.
Okay. Technology never works as hoped. Just a moment, please. Apologies for that. The camera's given up the ghost just at the vital moment. Frank, can I just get you to raise your thumb if you can hear me okay? Yep, good. Okay. We have sound if we don't have camera. So yes, thank you all for joining us. We'll kick off in a moment. Just by way of introduction, so the team here at Concept is myself and Rachel Holden. You should all have received an email from Rachel earlier in the day with a survey. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Also introduce our other team member who you should be able to see because he's on a different camera, Frank Gagan. Want to just raise your hand, Frank? Yeah, great. And then we'll also introduce some other key participants in a moment. In terms of what this study is all about, so as many of you will know, there's been a lot of talk about the investment in new generation required in New Zealand to decarbonise, and one of those options is offshore wind. And this study that we are undertaking is all about really, I guess, getting ready for that future, which I'll just go straight into this, to look at the capabilities that would be needed to support an offshore wind industry in New Zealand. We're also keen to understand what the existing capabilities look like, and we'll talk about the survey as part of the one of the key information gathering tools to understand that existing capability. And then we want to map those together and figure out where the opportunities and the gaps are. We're in the midst of crunching a whole lot of information at the moment and preparing a report. The study, while we're undertaking it, the study itself has been sponsored by Taranaki Offshore Partnership, and we have one of their representatives here who will speak about them in a moment, and also New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and providing engagement support is Araake, and we'll also have Jonathan from Araake just talk about that. So before we actually get into the talk about the industry, just turn over to Giacomo briefly to say a few words.
Yeah, thanks, David. Kia ora koutou, ko Giacomo Kalefi tōku ingoa. I'm here representing the Taranaki Offshore Partnership, which is a partnership of the New Zealand Super Fund and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Many of you would probably know the Super Fund. It's the crown investor that is tasked with investing cleverly so that we all get our pensions a bit further down the track. Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners is one of the largest renewable energy investment funds in the world, where especially our expertise lies especially in offshore wind. So we have built offshore wind farms before, and we are currently developing in many countries. We're developing in the east coast of the US, in Taiwan and Europe. So very good view of the global supply chain and how to get these projects to market. But we also, in every jurisdiction, we do a lot of work to promote local supply chain. So we've been looking at now a project in South Taranaki, off the coast of South Taranaki, for a couple of years. There's a really good potential in New Zealand to adopt this technology. From the very beginning, it was quite clear that New Zealand companies had a big role to play in future offshore wind job opportunities. So we really wanted to capture that with this very early study, and Concept Consulting are doing a great job. So you'll hear all about that. So I'll just close, and in closing, I'll thank the other partners on this work. So NZT and Araake. It's a great study, and we'll leave it back to Concept.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I think Jonathan, would be good to hear from you. Just a couple of words about Araake. Thank you. You're still on mute, Jonathan.
Thank you, David. Tēnā koutou katoa, everybody. Great to have you participate in today's session. Ariake is headquartered in New Plymouth, and we are involved in future energy development. We are a limited liability independent company, yet we've been established by the government and funded by MB. So we live in that, the twilight zone between the public and the private sector. We are very keen for this study to progress, to bring some insights into industry capability and workforce capability for the offshore renewable wind sector. We have a team at Ariake of just a dozen people. We're reasonably small, but we're nubile. And we work right across the country. You can go to the next slide if you like. We work right across the country and right across all the different components of the energy sector. If you go to the next slide, you'll see just a little bit of how Ariake operates. We believe in demand-led innovation. We put up challenges. We're looking for industry issues and challenges and complexities in terms of the transition to a low emissions future. And we look for innovation that will meet the needs of those industries in particular. So setting up demonstration and test beds is part of what we do. And then we create and share new energy knowledge with people. We want to ensure that we have a good replication across the country of technologies. The final slide from Ariake shows currently we've got about 32 different projects with 23 in the pipeline, right, as I said, right across the whole spectrum of the energy sector. Thank you to Concept Consulting. They're a very reputable, high reputation firm to do this work. It gives us great confidence that we'll get some really good results from it. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you, Jonathan. So without further ado, we'll move into the actual presentation part of things. Really, there's two parts of this. One is just giving you a bit of an outline for those not so familiar with offshore wind, what it's all about, what sort of opportunities it can throw up. And then the thing we're particularly keen for you to do is there's a survey, an online survey that you should have received a copy of just prior to this presentation, and we're keen to use that to gather information at an organisational level. And you would have seen in that email link, there's some other information sources that may be useful as well. We're keen to keep questions, get through the material relatively quickly, and so we've got time for questions. We realise you've all got busy lives, so if we manage to finish before 2, that'd be, I'm sure, great for people, but we want to leave plenty of time for questions, so we're going to go through these fairly quickly. And we will also, because there's quite a number of people on the call, we'll need to unmute you to ask questions, but we'll explain how we'll do that once we get to that stage. So just a few basics first about offshore wind to get this to move forward. So in essence, think of offshore wind as being very much like its onshore cousin, but located off the coast. We don't have any in New Zealand at the moment, but it's been around for a long time. The first offshore wind farm, that's over 30 years ago in Denmark. It's growing very, very rapidly in a lot of places in the world. And in fact, our near neighbour Australia is looking very seriously at a project, which again, we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. In fact, Copenhagen is one of the development partners. One of the other things that's probably just useful to give a bit of a sense of scale in all of this is one of the reasons, the number of reasons offshore wind is getting a lot of serious attention. One is that wind quality is actually better offshore than onshore. Offshore allows the use of higher efficiency, bigger turbines, and just to give you a sense of the scale there, you can see in that graphic the size of the sort of turbines that are being contemplated for the next generation, how they compare with the Sky Tower or New Plymouth Power Stack. So that's a more familiar landmark. And these offshore turbines can be either fixed to the seabed if the water's relatively shallow or floating. We know the New Zealand government is looking very seriously at it. They did some consultation on how do they enable offshore renewable development, a document released last year. There's a lot of issues to be thought about. It's a new thing for New Zealand. There's all the issues around, rights to occupy bits of the seabed and what have you. But that policy stuff is underway. It's not what we're going to talk about today. We realise there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that, but really today is talking about more, if you like, the commercial opportunities for suppliers and people to work in the industry. To keep this all real, we've anchored our study very much in what we call a reference scenario, and it happens to be a scenario that looks very much like the project that Copenhagen New Zealand Super are looking at in South Taranaki Bight. So around 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts. That's about the same size as the Huntly Power Station when it was built. It's shrunk in capacity now. This project envisaging would be commissioned toward the end of this decade and run for around 30 years. And if it was the initial stage of 1,000 megawatts, 1 gigawatt, possibly expanded up to 2,000 megawatts. And it would be serviced using shore-based maintenance and service strategy, primarily boats, crew transfer vessels, but also at times backed up by helicopter transfers. And as you'll see in a moment, the operation and maintenance phase is a key part of these sorts of projects because it goes on for a very considerable period. Just briefly, in terms of the port side of things, for this reference scenario, the assumption we've made is that if you like, the day-to-day servicing would occur out of a port nearby to the wind farm, and that would probably be something, and it could be Patia, for example. But there would also be a need for a port with more sort of facilities to deal with much larger, heavier components, and construction port is the term that's often used. And for this study, we've assumed that that would be Port of Taranaki and New Plymouth. So different kind of needs at different phases. What we're going to do now is just hand over to Frank, who's going to walk us through the key phases of development for an offshore wind farm and the sorts of opportunities that those provide at the different kind of parts of the life cycle. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, David. Can you hear me okay? All good? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can.
We can.
Yeah, okay, right. So we're going to break the next couple of slides down just into the phases of the project. Like a typical development of a wind farm, it's broken down into 3 phases. And right now we're in the development phase, which is a 3 to 5 year exercise to gather all the economic, environmental, and cultural and technical information required to get to a final investment decision. And we'll break these down in some as to what's involved in some following slides. And then there's a 3 to 4 year construction period, which is primarily an offshore activity combined with an onshore staging area. And typically these construction activities involve bringing the large modules in from offshore and installing foundations, and then larger vessels will come with a topside equipment and large cranes, and spread over several pulley seasons, summer seasons in this particular case. But then each wind turbine is then cabled up, and we get back to onshore infrastructure of substations and service ports. And once it's all up and running, there is obviously an onshore base for the ongoing O&M for the project for the next 30 years. And we'll give you a bit of an insight and what's involved in that. So we just go to the next slide. So we just take a look at the development phase. Broadly speaking, it's broken into the four elements of all the ecological environmental studies, all the environmental operating model studies, the physical environment, and then lastly, the engineering, design, and procurement. And as you can see, there's a vast array of issues to be looked at. If you just looked at environmental, for example, you can imagine the sea environment. There's subsea conditions, there's the topside conditions, there's the flora and fauna, and more like the seabirds, fish, and the like. All these will need to be studied with some degree of accuracy to assess the environmental impact, and that in itself, being out where it is, requires some very high-tech equipment, videography, acoustics, subsea surveys, work with ROVs. Currently, there is a LiDAR floating LiDAR that's been placed out to sea to gather the wind, wave, and current conditions. So we'll touch on that a bit later on. You could also, alongside of that, there is the cultural impact assessment, human impacts, habitats onshore, offshore, and the visual mana whenua consultation, impact on all habitats that we're going to interfere with. From a physical environment, there's obviously the geotech work for the foundations, the various archaeological examinations to ensure we're not disturbing any archaeological sites and what we do if we come across them. And then there's the assessment of the wind resource, which I mentioned earlier, which is currently being underway at the moment with a offshore LiDAR. And then later on, as engineering inputs are firmed up, there'll be the wind farm design, the construction planning, finalising the economics, the consenting and procurement, the O&M planning, everything that required to get to a final investment decision. So that's not atypical of any large development project of this nature. So we'll go to the next slide, which is a bit more nuanced in relation to offshore wind. Not being able to, we've got the added complication of working offshore, which is not unfamiliar to us in the oil and gas industry, but this is equivalent to installing 60 to 70 individual 15 megawatt power stations half a kilometre apart in a large array. It all has to be cabled up, has to be installed, the piles have to be driven. So there is the offshore component of the foundations, the topside tower, the nacelles, the blades all have to be fitted offshore. In addition to that, each of these individual power stations have to be cabled together into an array. This will likely be aggregated at an offshore substation, and this is then run on larger cables onshore to probably a Transpower grid substation somewhere onshore. And when you get to the O&M aspects, we'll have to have a service port for the day-to-day operations, and a large maintenance port, which we talked about earlier, would be likely we're using in our reference model, Partia as the base case, and New Plymouth as the base case for the large components which will be delivered, assembled, and the laydowns ready to be shipped out and shuttled out to the site for construction. In an O&M port, it's a much smaller port and much smaller vessels, but then again, that port doesn't exist as it used to. I mean, we are probably familiar that Partia used to be a port in the old days for the freezing works. So the studies going on at the moment to ascertain what will be involved in building a facility there, which would have boat mooring, all port services, all the facilities to fuel the vessels, officing and warehouse, and staff that are going to be going out there on a day-to-day basis on the maintenance. And on top of that, there's just the project management logistics. I probably won't dwell on it anymore. There's a lot of detail in these slides that you can get later on. If we can go to the next slide. So the O&M phase, as we mentioned earlier, will likely be based out of South Taranaki. And this is the day-to-day maintenance and basically the monitoring, performance analysis and coordination of the actual production of electricity, the maintenance of the turbines, the servicing of the various vessels that will be attending the turbines, the provision of all the port facilities, warehousing, logistics, the storage of spare parts and monitoring equipment, and this, basically the back office business facilities. That we'll talk about is a bit later on, but it's a core staff to run the project. On top of that, there'll be external O&M contractors, the likes of helicopter services, fuel reservicing, transport logistics that bring the spares to the site, various specialist services for CTV, ROVs, dive services, coatings, all sorts of specialist inspections, statutory inspections, and the like. And then on a long-term basis, there'll be the major maintenance routines that have to be done, which basically on like typically a 4 to 5 year project, and they will probably be based out of New Plymouth and be required to be based out of larger vessels that moor themselves offshore for several days. And then on top of that, we've got the induced or indirect activities around accommodation, hospitality, general services, extra staff at the supermarket, all the people involved with getting their haircuts and dentists and doctors. That will be a result of more staff being in the area. So we move to the next slide. So this is just an example, typical example from studies of various other projects, and our work on this particular project of the nature that will of the O&M staff that will be created in the area. This is about 60 full-time equivalents. And as I mentioned earlier, this will cover the operations, the marine coordination, the onshore logistics, and then the maintenance services and support staff. So we probably won't dwell on that too much in this presentation. We'll move forward and get to how this is broken down. So when you add all this up, there was a tier 1 O&M full-time equivalents of about 60 FTEs for the O&M. On top of that, we've estimated another 50 FTEs for O&M services. And then on top of that, the indirect services are going to give us another 65 odd for indirect services. So all in up, we have about we know that we have from recent work, we have about 190 FTEs involved in the project all up. Can we go to the next slide? What we've done is based on what's been going on in Victoria. Our Copenhagen Offshore partners are funding a large project called Star of the South. This is being used to, this is a bit more advanced than us and has developed an array of job types, job specifications, specialist services. And there's a link to that document in the material that you've been sent out on the invitation if you want to peruse that. But this is just an example page of how they're broken down, the types of resources needed primarily for the O&M phase, but you also see that's largely the dark blue bit's development, the slightly lighter blue is the construction phase, which you'll see the type of resources that are deployed, and then the O&M phase, which I've talked about just recently, the light blue phase. I'd like to move to the next slide. I'll hand back over to Rachel, who's going to give you some information on how to deal with the next part of our presentation.
Thank you, Frank. Hi, yeah, I'm Rachel. Sorry you can't see us. As David mentioned earlier, we have a survey that we're really keen for you to fill out for us. I have emailed this to most of you already, except some of the later registrations. If you haven't received it yet, then I will send it to you following the workshop. So in the survey, we want to gauge organisations' capability and interest to support an offshore wind industry in Taranaki. Now, it's just a short survey, should take you around 5 to 10 minutes. I think some of you may have already filled it in already, but basically the survey will take you through a range of products and services that are necessary to help support offshore wind industry. So you'll be able to see on the slide there a couple of examples of air services and UX systems. We'll take you through various products and services, and if you say that you are interested in providing a particular product or service, it will then ask you to indicate how ready you are to provide that product or service. You'll see on the slide that there's a key there, you know, whether you're limited, moderate or full readiness, and that basically depends on, you know, do you have experience in this area, and how much preparation would you need to do to be ready to provide the product or service. For example, if you're providing it for another industry or somewhere else, you may need to, you know, make some changes to your organisation to be able to provide that service to offshore wind. So that's basically what the survey is. As I said, I have emailed it to you, most of you already. Included in that email is a couple of links which are listed here as well. These would just provide you with a bit more information to help you fill out the survey. You may or may not want to look at those. But in addition, if you've got any questions, you're very welcome to email me, or when you go to the survey, you'll see there's a list of people that you can email, myself and David, and then also Giacomo and Sarah from Copenhagen Offshore Partners. Right, so that takes us to the end of our actual presentation. Now open it up for questions. Now all of you except the presenters are muted and you can't unmute yourself. So to do this, to ask if you've got a question, can you use the hand raising tool in Teams? And then when I see people raise their hands, I will unmute you one at a time and get you to ask your question. When you ask your question, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself, including what organisation you're from, and yeah, once you've asked your question, one of us will answer it for you based on who's appropriate for that question. So if anyone has got any questions, then please raise your hand and yeah, go from there. All right, we're just going to go to Rob, but sorry, it's just right. Right, Rob Firth, you should be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Excellent. Kia ora katoa, everybody. My name is Rob Frith. I am not currently affiliated with any organisation. I'm a freelance, for want of a better term, and about to become a new graduate project manager. So that should give you enough sort of infill on where I'm coming from, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, what sort of timeline are we looking at this? I was having major technology issues and I joined late. So what sort of timeline are we looking at for the project?
Giacomo, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll put my camera back on. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
I'll assume so, yeah. Thanks for the question, Rob. Yeah, so these are quite long lead projects. They're very big, really large infrastructure. So we are looking at towards the end of the decade for the turbines to actually come online, to be, let's say, putting something in the water, hopefully before the end of the decade, and to have full operation of the wind farm by the early 2030s. As it was sort of touched upon by Frank and David, there are a lot of jobs that can happen beforehand, but especially in the development phase. But especially there's a lot of preparation that we need to do for to make sure that that the job opportunities that then arrive are kind of catered for. So there's a lot of talk about training for all those positions that are not, all those opportunities that are not currently available. That's all stuff that we need to do quite early on. So the timeline is quite long, but it's not like we can wait until then to start preparing the industry to have these jobs, if it makes sense.
It does very much so, Giacomo, and I appreciate you your honesty on that score. If I may impose just one more question,
Sure.
Have you guys thought about I don't know what you'd call it, co-locating tidal generation or something like that off the stems of these things?
I can talk about that. It's a very interesting prospect. Some companies are looking at it around the world. The thing is, tidal is let's say quite a bit behind offshore wind in terms of development. So it's still at a, let's call it, pilot study phase around the world, whereas offshore wind is fully, proven from a technical point of view. But it is a very interesting question because obviously the wind turbines that we are proposing to install are spaced apart quite significantly, 1.5, 2 kilometers apart, and in between you have a lot of pretty much empty sea that could be used to co-locate other forms of renewable. So it's a very exciting prospect. We are not looking at that at this moment for this project, but could certainly be something in the future. Wave energy would be the other obvious candidate.
Very much so. That was going to be my next question. So thank you, Giacomo, for reading my mind.
Okay, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Have we got anyone else wanting to ask questions? Okay. Mark Nicholas, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Mark Nicholas, do you want to ask a question? You'll need to unmute yourself first, though.
You can unmute, I take it.
John Riding, would you like to ask a question? We'll need to unmute yourself first, John.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for the presentation. Marico do support an awful lot of wind farm developments in the UK to very, very large organisations. Of course, it's a big industry now. Now, one of the question I've got is that when you look at traffic surveys, which I see you do have there in one of the first phase, in the past when we supported Maui, it's all been done using AIS data, and most jurisdictions require radar surveys, and we do have mobile radar equipment that we've built ourselves that works with Starlink, so it can go anywhere. So one of my requests is that you actually look at helping facilitate those potentially if you want them, so that we can find decent sites to site radars for that sort of thing. The second quick question was is the organisation open to more than just one port option? I see you mentioned Payatia, but we have been looking at a different location right tucked inside the Taranaki Bight, where the wave, etc., it seems to be better for operating out of, but it's not a port at the moment, but it does have rail and road access. Thanks.
Yeah, I can talk to that. Yeah. Well, thanks, John. Yeah, the idea of Pattaya is obviously it came because Pattaya used to be a commercial harbor, right? So it obviously isn't now, but it had that history. So it seemed like a good idea to look into the technical feasibility of that, and we have some initial sort of outcomes that show that it would be technically feasible. Obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure upgrade required. What has been presented as a reference scenario and the project that which is very much the project that we are looking at, all the cards are still on the table. We have years and years of feasibility ahead of us, and so we are starting from a point of view of what is feasible, but we're certainly looking to develop a lot of other opportunities. So we are all ears for suggestions of how we could be doing things differently. And on your radar question, I am very much not an expert on radar, so that's why we have this forum where radar experts come and tell us what we should be doing. So yeah, keen to hear from you. Hope that vaguely answers the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. I know that Mark Nicholas has a question. Are you able to unmute yourself yet? I've tried doing it a different way.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
I'm a real estate agent in South Taranaki, born and bred here for 67 years ago. And so that's my sort of background and position. I live between Patea and Hawera and operate in that general area. My question relates around the setup phase, a long way away from any electricity, in matters of accommodation and office provisions, et cetera, and that connection. So previous questions and comments around timelines and things of being 3 to 5 years and all that sort of stuff is tends to be relative to getting some sparks happening. But before that, all of the practicalities of housing, feeding and accommodating people, et cetera, is my area of interest. Is there the opportunity of talking about the shorter timelines in relation to that requirement?
Yeah, I can. Yep. Yeah. So certainly, Mark, and that I guess forms part of that exciting third component of jobs that David and Frank were talking about. So let's call it induced economy. So the fact that that we are looking at the very much the core jobs that would be required during operations and maintenance and construction. We're looking at the indirect jobs that would support those direct jobs. And then you have all that induced economy of, you're right, people need an accommodation, and we will need offices, we will need warehouses. So all that will happen. It's not going to happen next year, though. We still, probably something that didn't quite come up in the presentation, but we are still looking at an industry that doesn't have a regulatory environment yet. So there is effectively no laws allowing us or any other developer to go out and build offshore wind. So until that happens, and that's something that MB, the ministry, are working through, until that happens, it's really difficult for us to, press go on a lot of the really big ticket items. So to answer your question, yes, we will need a lot of real estate agents that help us, place people around and find accommodations and restore the hotel in Patea and all that. But when that might happen, it might be a bit further down the line. But the quicker we manage to make this industry fly with the help of all you all, the quicker we will get people in Patea.
That's fine. Great sales answer.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Right, thank you for that question, Mark. Is there anyone else with any other questions? Okay, Reet McVicker, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just like to find out more about the size of the turbines you intend using. We've done a lot of wind turbine farms in New Zealand where we transport the components around here, and I'd just like to know from a size point of view how big the blades and those type of components are, and if there would be any need for transporters to move the components within the port once they arrive with the vessel and then get taken out to sea.
Yep, yeah, I can talk to that. So we're basing the base case for the project at the moment on what is pretty much the largest offshore wind turbine currently under prototype, but it looks like it will soon become fully commercial, and that's a 15 megawatt machine. The predictions are that they will become much bigger going ahead, but for the moment we're sticking with 15 megawatts. Seems like a pretty good number. In terms of component sizes, one that I have sort of off the top of my head is blade length. We will be looking at around 110 meters, so significantly longer than most of the onshore wind turbines, and heavier as well. So in terms of componentry, we're talking about much larger and much heavier than onshore wind. So
Yeah.
because of that, there is normally no transport inland. The offshore wind industry is very much build next to a port, ship it to another port, and from there directly to site. But you are right in saying that we will need movement within the port. So normally the blades, for example, will be offloaded from a vessel coming from wherever they get manufactured, which could be Southeast Asia. They will be offloaded at the quayside at the port, and then they very likely would have to do a little bit of travel to some other area of the port to be stored. So there will be need for that kind of, let's say, import mobilization equipment for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Right. I think we've got another question from Rob Frith. Rob, are you wanting?
Yes, please. Sorry, I do apologise for taking up your time again, Giacomo. You did mention that you're going to have vessels working out of Patia as far as O&M goes. Given the current state of downplay on burning of fossil fuels and that like, have we done any thought about fuel transition, potentially using the power to electrolyse hydrogen, that sort of stuff?
Yep. Yeah. So, sorry, Rob, are you talking about fueling the vessels going out of Patia with a different fuel, or just?
Yeah. Two-part question, Giacomo.
Sure.
I should have been more obvious about it. The first one was the actual fueling of the vessels going out to the site.
Yeah.
Because I know that the government they're really starting to push on the renewable fuel side of things, and marine diesel is probably one of the things that they're going to be looking at trying to reduce the use of.
Yep.
And the other one was, is there any plans, future or otherwise, to use the electricity generated from this facility to electrolyse hydrogen that can then be burned onshore for various means?
Yep, sure. From the point of view of how to fuel the vessels, I will admit we have not thought about that yet. We're quite a while away. Vessels for operations and maintenance often get built bespoke in the country. In the case of Patia, if Patia does become the operations and maintenance harbor, everybody who knows the area knows that the sandbar at the river mouth is pretty nasty, and in general we have pretty low draft in the river, so the vessels would probably have to be designed for those conditions. So by the time we get to commission the vessels, we would certainly be looking into the most sustainable alternative for to fossil fuels to fuel them. I always like the idea of I'm not entirely sure if they're already available, but electric O&M vehicles. I mean, considering that once the vessel arrives at the turbine, there's pretty much a 15 megawatt source of electricity just above. So it would be nice at some point of thinking that they could be fully electric. But on the second part of the question about hydrogen, that is a big topic. It gets discussed quite a bit. CIP, we're doing work all over the world on the green hydrogen opportunity. We're pretty much only looking at green hydrogen, so hydrogen that gets manufactured from fully renewable sources. It is a possibility here as well. So we're looking at bringing the power to shore, and then part of it could go into the transmission grid and just be used as electricity, but we could also have a significant component that gets used to manufacture other products, can be hydrogen or other products. And we're not necessarily too convinced about the business case of then exporting massive amounts of hydrogen around the world. We are doing lots of really big projects in Australia, for example, to mass produce hydrogen, and it's difficult to see how a New Zealand production could keep up with that in terms of or be competitive. So at the moment, we're not necessarily banking on that too much, but certainly hydrogen does seem like a marketable product in the country as well. For example, for sustainable fuels as well. So it's something that we are actively looking into. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, not at all, Jack. And I appreciate you being reasonable with me trying to grope my way through this. This is an entirely new field for me.
Sure.
Where do I sign up? Because this sounds like it's something I want to be a part of.
Well, Rachel's survey is a very good place to begin.
Yes,
Great,
so
thank you.
I was going to add the survey that we've sent to most of you, and I will send it to the rest of you after the workshop. If you respond to that survey, then you will get put onto a database of suppliers so that you can be contacted when it's time to kind of start working on different areas. So doing the survey is, as Giacomo said, a good place to start.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Giacomo. Appreciate your
time. Right, is there anyone? Oh, yes, we have got someone else with a question. No. Oh, sorry. Matt Cotton, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, Giacomo. Matt here from Energy Bank. We're working on a solution for energy storage at the turbines. You know all about us.
Yep.
I just wanted to know what CIP's appetite for introducing novel and new technology like our energy storage solution to the South Taranaki project versus proven floating offshore wind tech.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. And yes, I know Energy Bank quite well. Well, we are looking at South Taranaki. We're looking for fixed foundations and fairly shallow water, so it will not quite be the deep water floating system that Energy Bank can work with. So in general, in terms of CIP works mostly with institutional investors. So there's a lot of pension funds that invest in CIP. So it's a company that does have quite a bit of risk appetite. So we do, and it's proven by the fact that we are pretty much the first ones we've been the first ones in quite a few markets for offshore wind. Having said that, there is an element of, really, really novel technologies are a bit difficult to back with that kind of financial backing. We're not currently working on tidal and wave either. They're considered still a bit pilot stage. So, but having said that, it's very open-eyed investors. So the more technologies like that get de-risked and get proven going ahead, the more CIP will be interested in considering them, especially if there's an opportunity for co-location and storage from floating wind, which is a big deal.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe we've got a question from Jamie McNeil. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Jamie, do you have a question?
Sorry about that. Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, hi. I'm from GHD. We're a consultancy, global consultancy. I was just looking at the development phase, the various elements of that. I was just wondering if there was any visibility around which studies have already been procured and which ones are yet to be procured.
Yep, we're very much at the early stages. So this study that you just saw, the industry capability mapping, has been running for a year. It's one of the I guess the that's the types of studies that we're running at this time. We are also running early environmental studies, so we're not quite ready to start the full, environmental monitoring, which is extensive. But we're trying to do as much as we can to line up smaller scopes that still add value. We recently, just last week, deployed the first real physical piece of offshore wind, the offshore wind industry in New Zealand, which is a buoy, a floating lidar, which is installed 37 kilometers off the coast of South Taranaki, and is going to be there for a year, measuring wind speeds for us and getting us a very good wind readings all the way up to 300 meters. We've recently concluded a study on Port Taranaki as to highlight its usability, let's say, as a marshalling and construction port. So we're doing all these, I guess, desktop studies to start preparing the understanding of the industry. We are still maybe 1 or 2 years away from the heavyweight engineering, certainly for these structures. We could potentially next year start looking at some concept engineering, but it all depends. Most of the timeline is really quite closely linked with the speed at which the regulatory environment develops, because until we have a bit of visibility on how to get a feasibility license for a project like this, it's really difficult to push other activities ahead. I think GHD are active in the environmental space, so that could probably be a place of interest. But as was mentioned by Frank earlier, there's a lot of the activities that we do in development are not too dissimilar from what, for example, an oil and gas offshore development would require. So we do realize that there's a lot of that expertise already in country, and we're absolutely keen to use that a lot more than having to bring in consultants from abroad.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you, Jamie.
Very welcome.
So anyone else with any questions? Okay, Laura, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thank you. I'm with Mighty Waves, and we have an offshore floating platform that we have in development that has been tested in Carter Rock and various other places for reliability. And I'm just wondering, we are getting different kinds of information from different people regarding when you're starting projects, whether or not people still want to do demonstration of new technologies, or if people feel for floating that the technologies that are there are becoming proven and they don't want to do that now. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Laura. So we as in Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, are developing floating projects pretty much all over the world. We're developing, amongst others, the Pentland floating offshore wind farm off the coast of Scotland. So I am not a floating wind expert. We're looking at fixed foundations to begin with here. We will be looking at floating offshore wind in New Zealand as well, a little bit further down the track. But my understanding is that the question on what the right floater, what the right design for the substructure is, that's pretty much still open. There's a lot of concepts out there, and some are clearly much more advanced than others. But it seems to me that there's still the eureka moment for floating substructures might not have come yet. So it seems like there's quite a bit that can be done. The thing with pilot projects or demonstration projects, it's really difficult to do them under a investment, I guess, vehicle like the one we have. Again, we're investing for pension funds and groups that are, expecting a fairly good amount of returns. So taking on board excessive risk at the development stage can be a bit tricky. I mean, you still have to get the investors on board on that, and they would rather go with technologies that are a bit more proven.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Laura. Do we have any other questions? No. we might start wrapping up then. If you think of any further questions that you want to ask any of us, then please do get in touch by email. If you've already got the survey, and if you haven't got it, we know send it to you. You'll have my contact details, but on the survey link as well, there are also contact details for Giacomo as well. But feel free to flick any questions through to me and I can make sure they get to the right person. Thank you all for coming and listening today. I hope that it's been helpful and provided you the information that you need. And once again, encourage you to fill out the survey. It will, help us establish, what organisations are capable of providing for an offshore wind industry in Taranaki. And as I said earlier, we'll get you put on the database so that you can be contacted at the appropriate time. So thank you once again, and have a good rest of the day.